Hi guys, how are you? So nice to connect to you. Welcome to this video. My name is Laura and welcome to Pleading Healer. So today we're going to go through a few things that I've been wanting to discuss for the past 2 weeks or so. So we're just going to take it really easy right now. We're going to talk about Atlantis and time, and what I think happened with that, and then maybe a few other things. But let's just see how far we can get here. Okay, so there are some channels out there who are saying, for example, that we had like up to 1,000 years of our history erased and those kind of things as well. And while it does resonate a little bit with me that certain parts are really not the way that they are, let's put it that way, you know, that we've just really been fooled around with and everything. The entire concept of like having 1,000 years erased completely has not really resonated with me when I heard it. I mean, it was interesting. And there are even pictures out there of like gravestones where, you know, they changed, for example, the year 1607, they put like a J 607. So that would mean the year 607 instead of 1607 and those kind of things. Maybe I can pull some up actually. Okay, so for example, I pulled up like 3 images right now, just like a random search I did online too, because to be honest with you, and I tried going to old cemeteries, especially like on the East Coast in New York City and everything. But, you know, at one point, I think I was in Greenwood Cemetery, which is the largest cemetery in Brooklyn and all of that. And then they have like a few other ones in Queens, but I haven't made it there yet. It's just that the ones that I did go to, everything has been rewritten. Like the entire tombstone is brand new. It was pretty much redone over these past 40, 50, 20, 30 years, whatever. It's extremely hard to find originally tombstones from way back when. So you will probably find more online unless you really know a cemetery that you personally can go to. And I would say probably you'll have more luck on the East Coast than out West as well, just because the East Coast is like so much older than out West, but it really depends, I guess. So with this specific instance here, you know, we have the year I or 1653. So just note that on some of these, the 1 can be like an I or a J. An I comes from in anno, or the J is, you know, Jesus Christ. So after Jesus Christ, meaning it's been like the year 653. Also note how the numbers are very far from each other. So it's almost like these two belong together and these two belong together. So you have stuff like that. And there are channels out there, you know, who have literally specialized in all of this and kind of specialized in analyzing tombstones and everything too. So here's another one, you know, where actually the 1 looks more like a J than anything. So I 661 or J 661, you know, like this one here and this one really does not look the same at all, right? So it's almost like it's not 1,000 or 1661, you know, it's not like a 1,000 years, but it's literally just an I or a J, for example. With this one, you can see it a bit more even, like legit, the J, like it's J724, right? It's not 1724. Sure, the 7 looks funky too, but this looks more like a J than a 1, in my opinion too. So it's almost like it's the year 724 and not 1724, like they want us to make believe. So there are legit, you know, channels out there who are basically saying they erased 1,000 years of our history, and that they've kind of done that between the year of, what was it, 200 to 1200 or 300 to 1300, something like that. But however, you know, I do believe they really messed with our history and that they erased crucial components of it, especially like old native cultures, like Norwegian cultures and the Viking culture and everything, that they completely rewrote that history. But it didn't 100% make sense to me personally because if you look at the fashion that was supposedly around in the 200s, 300s, 400s, whatever, and then you look at the fashion that's literally around in the 1200s, 1300s, 1400s and everything, there is like a large jump. You know, if you go just purely in the sense of what did they wear exactly. Now, the most fashion that actually changed is indeed, you know, the Renaissance period and like medieval ages and beyond. So like medieval ages, 1400, 1500, 1600, 1700, 1800, like that period where you have the Age of Enlightenment, the Renaissance, and all of that too. So it does seem like not too many fashion changes happened between the year of 0 and 1200 or so, but there still have been some changes. And I also think, and you know, for the sake of it, I can't find this one video. I don't know if someone took it down already, but I had a video saved that this one child had actually made on the original presidents of the US and how they're all kind of tied into the Great Britain culture, like how Great Britain was founded around the year 1000, 1100, and 1200, you know, all of that, because it kind of all came over from the Viking culture too, and how the original presidents, like more than half of the US presidents, actually a huge majority, maybe like 75% of all US presidents so far are all related to the founders of UK and Great Britain and England in general. And so I can't find that video anymore. I think they took it down already. And I kind of wish I had just kind of screen recorded it when it came out. It was like from last year or whatever. Just a random video that I came across, you know, on social media, but it made a whole lot of sense to me. So maybe I have to just do my own research somehow. But I do think, so the theory of, you know, 1,000 years being erased from our history and everything, it makes sense to a certain degree because you have tombstones like this that very clearly have a J. You know, I do think this is supposed to be a J and not a 1. Like no matter how you turn it, no matter how funky the writing is, this to me does not look like a 1 at all. Just like in the other picture, the 1 and the 1 was so different, right? The one between 1600 and 1661, like it was just so different. Sure, they have like a bit of a funky writing and everything here, but I do think this just does mean like either J or I or whatever. But I do think that especially when it comes to, you know, if you look at England and Scandinavia and everything, I do think there must have been some things that happened between the year of 200 and 1200. And I personally know just from my own insight that I'm getting to that Avalon happened during that period very strongly. You know, that was around 800, 900, maybe up to 1000 even. But I do know that there were some civilizations out there that they're trying to erase from our history, from our memory, and from our DNA, where we're really not getting the full picture. And Avalon was one of those, by the way. I don't think Avalon happened at all during the Tudor regime or anything. I really do think it happened like from the year 600, 700, 800, 900, around that time. So there are some crucial things that I've gotten insight on and that I've read on and that have also come through during sessions, you know, especially shamanic healings when we do soul retrievals and everything, where Avalon keeps coming up for a lot of people, you know, the Camelot area and everything, Camelot, Avalon, that there were some crucial things. And the way Avalon really looks like to me and what it felt like to me whenever I tap into that, especially when doing a healing session on someone, is it's basically one of the last highest vibrational civilizations that existed until everything came crumbling down again, and until people were really thrown back into the medieval ages. Okay, so let me just stop this share here. So you get the idea, you know, like some tombstones really aren't written the way that you think they are, but it's really hard to come across them in real life because they're legit rewriting entire cemeteries, especially here in the US on the East Coast, especially in New York City, you know, where I was up until recently too. So it's been extremely difficult to actually find some proof. I think if you were to go to some maybe older towns like Williamsburg, Virginia, which is an old colonial town, or maybe certain towns like Plymouth in Massachusetts or somewhere like that, maybe you'll have a bit more luck. So if someone actually lives around there and wants to do that and send me pictures, you absolutely can. but especially like in the larger cities, I feel things are being rewritten like that. So it's definitely been interesting to observe and witness. So why is it that time is so different across the spectrum, that some people are like, oh, they must have erased like 1,000 years of our time, and then other people like me are getting different types of insight? So it all kind of ties into the same thing, and that's basically them really messing with our time. And it is tied to ancient Atlantis or the current Atlantis as well. Okay, so I don't even know really how to start, but what I've kind of written down, with the most recent insight that I got is ancient Atlantis, or rather Atlantis, because it's not ancient if it's still going on and it's still happening. It never actually stopped. So some people are like, was Atlantis a program? Did it even happen? Because all the New Agers are talking about it, and the Lemurian codes and the Atlantean codes, and how we're so special if we have indeed experienced Atlantis and everything. So first of all, the New Agers are full of BS. I want to have like a New Age review video and everything out too, where I'm just going through all the concepts of, oh, the 5D ascension trap, and how we're not supposed to be dragged into that, and what are other concepts. Listening to your spirit guides is another great concept that we have to dissect. And Atlantis, I do think, is for some people, especially New Agers, is just something for them to feel more special about themselves, especially people who are really into the starseed origins and who really need to figure out that they're so special because they've lived on multiple different star systems and everything, and that's why they came to Earth and volunteered here and everything. When I have videos out there saying how we were tricked to come here and how we were lured to come here and everything, so you can definitely check those out too. And by the way, there's a playlist new to this channel which has all of those videos and kind of explains how we came to Earth and how we were tricked to come here. So for the New Agers, Atlantis is kind of like, oh, it happened maybe 600,000 years ago, or 100,000 years ago, or 10,000 years ago, or whatever. But now it's done with, and we're kind of figuring out Atlantean karma and everything. That's never resonated with me. For some reason, it's always been like, I don't believe, well, I mean, it's possible that the civilization stopped existing and everything, like Avalon did as well, and all of that, even though it might exist on a different plane somehow still. But it's never really resonated that we experienced that civilization and then all of a sudden it just stopped for whatever reason, because people were cruel to each other or doing all these experiments on each other. Now, I did get insight that, for example, the entire Alpha Centaurian and Hadarian constellation, like the closest star constellation to here, which is the Centaurus constellation, that actually could have very well been created during ancient Atlantis, or during Atlantis. I'm not even going to use ancient Atlantis anymore. And so that a lot of these star systems, like the Pleiades even, like that, those actually came about through Atlantis, that we somehow created them. And that's why some stars are newer, some are older. And even like so-called scientists, right? The ones that are promoting like the mainstream agenda, even they don't really know how old these stars really are. The opinion keeps varying on it, and this, like pretty much everything else that goes with science, no one really knows jack. They just think they do because they do their experiments, but at the end of the day, they really don't know that much. So a lot of these star systems, including for sure though the Centaurus constellation, was created during Atlantis when it was at its height, let's put it that way. But Atlantis never stopped, and we are still basically in it. It's an ongoing experiment, okay? And then also with Lemuria, I kind of got, maybe Lemuria was actually a program, because I didn't get much insight on that. So there's obviously a lot of huge psychic blocks around this topic and everything. So I didn't get much insight on Lemuria yet. I'm not sure it really matters that much. I really am not sure Lemuria was really as powerful as all these psychics want us to make believe and everything. It really is more about Atlantis. In my opinion, what I've gotten so far, it's all about Atlantis. So Lemuria could have existed in one form or another and then been destroyed the way that they said Atlantis would have been destroyed. But it could very well be that Lemuria is a program as well, and that others actually might be in Lemuria, like kind of stuck in that reality, and yet others are in this Atlantean reality. Okay, so the way you kind of have to imagine it, and the way that I saw it very clearly, was that we're kind of like under this Atlantean globe, because, you know, the way that I had that one video that we're on a ship and everything. So that we're literally on a ship, the mothership or whatever, and that we were like kind of under this globe. So I'll come up with a little graphic too once I just read out what I have here. That's kind of the Atlantean globe. It's all under this Atlanticite globe. That's kind of the word that I got. So we have, you know, the most current injection and everything, and especially that one, but also other injections are actually erasing our history, especially the ones that deal with mRNA and, you know, the DNA and everything. The ones that really get to our DNA in the sense that the newest injection does for a lot of people, you know, unless some people have gotten a placebo or whatever, which I think most people have not necessarily gotten a placebo. I think people who got it, it depends on the doses that they got, and which is why some people are reacting more strongly to it than others. But it also has to do with your soul makeup and, you know, how strong your DNA is and everything. So I just feel people who are more of a clone body or like a soulless being, or who don't have as much soul in their body, could react to it a bit differently, you know, than people who have a soul, for example, just those kind of things. But it also has to do with how well you have treated your body over the entirety of your life too, how your immune system really is. And the stronger it is, obviously, the better it is in handling this stuff and the poison that they put in it. Let's put it that way. But yeah, essentially, you know, I think a lot of people just got like maybe a weaker dosage, especially in the beginning of it. And then the more we got into summer and everything, that's when they started giving on the full-on dosages. And then obviously with the kids, some are getting like weak dosages to them right now too, but other kids are getting the full-on thing. So it's really just a huge experiment, right? So the most current injection is erasing our history and also part of our DNA. There's like the signature cat meowing in the background. So this must be important if they're trying to distract me in that way. But it's a huge Atlantean experiment, all right? So the way that they erase our history is because our entire timeline is in our DNA, right? Like it's in our bones, in our hair structures, and in pretty much everything. We carry our DNA with us from lifetime to lifetime, which is also why some people look very similar to a previous lifetime that they had, no matter if they were a man or a woman in that lifetime. You know, certain structures always stay the same. Like, for example, the high cheekbones in my case have stayed the same in a lot of my lifetimes. The hair color, not so much, but I have been of a certain hair color or of a certain makeup a lot of times in a lot of different lifetimes. It's just, you know, even like I've even seen myself as an African woman at one point, and I think that actually must have been in one of the Atlantean lifetimes, because there were several, because it was just so ongoing, where I literally really recognize myself. So it's kind of like your auric field always stays the same as well. You know, that's kind of your imprint. So with the most current injection, kind of getting rid of that, you know, I literally have friends where I watch their videos online, and it's almost like the injection was such a shock to their system that their entire auric field legit disappeared for almost 6 months straight. And it's still not 100% there yet and everything. You know, those kind of things is how they're erasing our history, our auric field, and also, you know, our DNA with it. So our history, our makeup is all in our DNA, and that's kind of how they do it with the most current injection. So Lemuria is pretty far away. We're pretty far removed from that. I don't believe, I mean, you always carry codes and everything with you from lifetime to lifetime, even from like thousands of years ago and from other star systems, whatever. But I just don't believe this new age narrative of, oh, we're so special because some people are carrying Lemurian codes or Atlantean codes, whatever. Lemuria to me just seemed very far away, like almost non-existence right now. So some people are like, where do they say Lemuria used to exist? Like maybe Japan or Australia or whatever. And when they're kind of just saying the dolphins and the whales and whatever, all of that is Lemuria or Atlantis. To me, that's just a bunch of bogus. It doesn't do anything really other than maybe make people feel special about who they think they are. But we're all under this Atlantean globe of AI. So Atlantis itself was all about AI and these AI experiments. I do think a large portion of the clone bodies and the soulless beings were created during the height of Atlantis. You know, the entire experiment of splitting your soul pieces up to putting one soul piece in one body and one in the main body, stuff like that, you know, so you have like different soul pieces of yourself in different bodies in that form. Maybe you would consider that a clone body or just like a different type of experiment. Like those 100% happened. The entire Centaurus things, or kind of like splintering off like the head of a cat, putting it onto a cow's body, those, all of that, you know, there's so many reports about that. Yeah, I do think all of that occurred, but I think there's so much more that occurred. And I literally think a large portion of these soulless beings were kind of created during what used to be ancient Atlantis, or what still is Atlantis. So Atlantis in the form is still playing out now. It never got destroyed, and we keep forgetting ourselves in the game, okay? So it's legit, you know, the reincarnation cycle, reincarnating over and over again in this game called life or whatever. That is legit what the Atlantean experiment is. Like we, you know, we had this life during Atlantis, and a lot of us may have been doing these experiments, whatever, if you were around. Not everyone, I think, was around, because some people literally didn't come here until maybe 400 years ago or 100 years ago, or maybe a few thousand years ago. But the old souls, I do think, were probably around during Atlantis. And the ones, you know, and that's kind of also, let's just say the walking gods or whatever, you know, all of the god tales of like Jupiter, Zeus, what's the other ones, Venus, whatever, you know, all of the Greek gods that are basically like planets partially too and everything. There were like hundreds of gods, right? And I'm not saying that, you know, some people are like, I got to call them BitChute, being like, wait, you don't believe in the God or Jesus or whatever, but then you believe in gods. And I'm like, you really did not understand what I was talking about if you really think that way. So no comments from Christians in that sense, you know, like this is really above any sort of religion, which religion is really just there to trap your spirituality. And we can discuss that in a different video too, how especially Christianity is out there to trap your soul and your spirituality and put it in this box where it actually doesn't belong, but they're really siphoning off your soul essence in that way too. But, you know, with the gods and everything, there were literally like hundreds of gods. You know, if you look at all the god names, like there were several different sun gods, there were several different this and that god, the god of hunting, the goddess of the moon, like all of those things. The souls could have very well been that at one point in time, you know, especially with the Isis Osiris saga, just those kind of things, right? There were so many different tales in all these different cultures. And so if you just kind of imagine like the old souls being that, you know, whatever it even means to be a god, like we don't even know what it really means. Like maybe we really did have those superpowers or those things that people would consider superpowers nowadays, but that were actually quite normal back then. And then we just kept forgetting ourselves in the game over and over again with the reincarnation and everything. But, you know, for back then, those were normal things, but we were able to create, I don't know, like make fire out of nothing, or, you know, just create all these different elements and all of that. So the original souls were able to kind of splinter off parts of their soul pieces somehow. It was a part of an AI experiment, which is why AI is so present in our life right now too. And it has been present for a really long time. We just didn't notice it maybe up until recently, up until like the last 100 years or so when the industrialization came around. But AI has always been present. You know, you always had these beings in the energetic realm trying to, you know, lead us astray. You probably always had the Zeta Greys or like all these like alien stuff, whatever. It's just that right now that our world is being created upon AI, we're just kind of more synced with it, you know, because now we have like TVs, like screens, you know, computer screens, cell phone screens, all of that we're a bit more synced into it, because it's easier for them to actually watch us through those things, you know, through the means of technology observation and surveillance and all of that. So yeah, so some of us, you know, especially like the older souls, and I do think there are quite a few walking around on this earth plane right now. They were kind of, you know, doing all these AI experiments. How exactly it came about, if we were seduced to do it by other beings, or if it's literally part of the demiurge and something just happened, I'm not 100% sure yet. But it did put the entire Milky Way in a chaos, 100%. You know, there are other people out there who are talking about a Milky Way that's in complete chaos right now. So it's not like you would just go to Orion or other star systems or an entirely different Milky Way and it would be better. No, it's just chaotic no matter where you go. You know, just like right now during the pandemic, no matter what country you're early in, it's just a chaos and a mess everywhere almost. You know, even if you are in a freer state here in the US, or even if you are in Mexico or whatever, it's unpleasant. So that's kind of how I saw it in that way, because the Milky Way is in complete chaos and turmoil. So then so that kind of ties back into the time. Okay. So with some people saying they might have erased 1,000 years of, so time is like so fluid. The way that I really saw it is, even just by thinking something, you can almost erase parts of your time somehow, or parts of the time, or they're really trying to erase a lot of our time right now somehow. They're really trying to restructure and rewrite something with our time right now, which is why a lot of Mandela effects are coming about. Mandela effects are when you remember your t-shirt as a child was like blue, and then you look at an old picture and it's red, and you're like, I could have sworn my favorite t-shirt was blue, those kind of things. Or you remember Nelson Mandela dying in the 80s when he didn't die until 2012, 2013, or some people are like, maybe he died in the 90s. So that's basically the Mandela effect. And the reason that's coming about is because they're really messing with our time, and they've been doing it for, well, most likely since 2011, 2012, on a more profound level, but they've been doing it pretty much since forever already. So I personally, what the insight I got is that they rewrote 1,000 years of our history. They didn't necessarily erase it, but for some people, and those are the people that are claiming 1,000 years didn't exist, and they're having the tombstones and everything, which you have, you have the evidence of the tombstone. Like I showed you, some tombstones literally have, J607 instead of 1607 and everything. For those people, the 1,000 years was indeed erased. So for some people, it was erased. That's why we have the J760 and all of that. But for others, it wasn't. And that gets even more confusing if you try to comprehend it from like a perspective, that includes like thinking about it and the brain and everything. It doesn't make sense, but energetically, it actually makes a lot of sense. I personally got that maybe it's only been 800 to 900 years instead of the 1,000 years that they want to tell us. So that now technically we would be around the year 1600, no, not 1600, 1800 or 1900. Someone else commented recently on one of my videos talking about the Coptic year and all of that too. So just the way how they restructured our entire calendar system in the medieval ages, from Julian to a different type of calendar system and everything. All of that is very telltale how they are pretty much confusing the heck out of us. Basically, we're at this point, like through the past 500 years with all of the changes. And then parts of Russia had a different calendar system than we had, which makes things even more confusing. So whoever's date of birth it was, like in January, whatever, according to our calendar system, it wasn't until December, or I don't know. So, it gets super confusing if you even start to comprehend it on that level. But I got, instead of 1,000 years, maybe we only had the 800 or 900 years. So they might have just pushed like an additional 200 years in between that didn't really exist. So that right now, technically, we wouldn't even be in the 20th or 21st century. We would be more like around the year 1900 or something like that. But the feeling of time is being erased and changed right now. And that's happening partially through this agenda for some people, and partially just through, I think, through AI in our environment, literally through the bombardment of the 5 and then the G tower and everything, through bombardment of everything, like us inviting so much AI into our environment, which I know some people, their job is like cybersecurity or pure AI and everything. But through the means of that, you know, we just have AI everywhere in our environment, and we're being bombarded with it. We're being bombarded with the rays and all of that. So it's a huge mess right now, is what I'm getting specifically from this thing. And yeah, so Atlantis itself never stopped. Now let me see if I can actually come up with a short graphic of kind of what I saw. So it was definitely like this globe-like structure that I saw. Okay, once again, trying to draw a little bit. And so basically Atlantis globe is the way that I saw it specifically, that we're kind of like beneath the globe or something, and that Atlantis is like playing out outside of it, you know? And so we're kind of being bombarded with a bunch of stuff that's actually coming from the Atlantean time. And this is us right here, you know? So we're kind of right here below this globe-like thing. It's almost like a snow globe or whatever. You can kind of shake it and put even more turmoil into people's lives and all of that. That's kind of how I saw it. So we're being bombarded by all of this stuff, you know, that's coming from the Atlantis time still. And the reason it's still coming from it is because time itself itself doesn't really exist, you know. Just like making this video and even trying to talk about time, and maybe they erased time, maybe they didn't, like it in and of itself, it doesn't really exist. You know, right now we have access to past lives that we had 400, 500 years ago, just like that. And that's why we're able to tap into those through shamanic journeying, or, you know, just in general through past life regression and all of that too. Maybe through hypnosis for some people, but it's really not necessary. I want to point that out too. You're able to access those at any point that you want if you're just open to it. We're able to access lifetimes from like thousands of years ago and everything as well. You know, time is just, especially, I mean, you know, I don't know if you guys ever did this experiment in school where your teacher was basically showing you 1 minute can feel extremely long or extremely short, depending on what you do. So the way we did it was, for 1 minute long, we were basically just running around and having fun. And then for the second minute long, we weren't allowed to do anything. We were just sitting on our stools, and the minute felt almost like an hour long. Whereas when we were just running around and having fun, the minute felt like 10 seconds. That is legit. And that's an experiment that's, you know, you can do very easily on yourself, on your own as well. That is legit how time can be stretched, but also compressed in that way. The perception of time, just because there's a clock measuring it somehow, the perception of time can vary so immensely, right? You know, especially if you have like a boring job, whatever, 8 hours can feel like 2 days and all of that too. So time is it's almost ridiculous to try to explain the concept of time. But if you know what I mean, if you experienced it yourself, how time is just so fluid, and how we legit can access time like that. So we can access all of these past life things and everything. We can probably even access our time in what used to be ancient Atlantis through those means as well. But right now, Atlantis kind of put like this globe-like structure over where we are, whether or not we're on this spaceship thing or, you know, on this plane of existence. They put like this globe-like thing over it. It could have very well been that the octopus-like demiurge that I saw back in the spring, almost a year ago, is like above that too. And that's kind of preventing us from moving forward, and from the Atlantean experiment to kind of just end, or from us just to kind of escape it. So there are a lot of different components to it. And, you know, obviously I don't have the full picture either. Otherwise I probably wouldn't be here. But this is just the most recent form of insight that I got, and in regards to time, and just trying to explain that too. And yes, this absolutely has to do with the Atlantean experiment too. It's almost like these different steps that they're rolling out, and this is one of the steps. Now, whether or not, you know, you can completely heal yourself from that and everything, that's another story. But for most people, they don't even really have the understanding of what's really going on when they just inject themselves with that. You know, they're doing it because they're so pressured with the mandates and everything. So they rather just have that in themselves just to, you know, have a normal life or whatever. And, you know, there's so much that ties into that, you know, the enslavement that we've experienced in previous lifetimes too, and how we're reacting in this lifetime. Whereas, you know, you have people who are really willing to just fight and stand up for your rights and all of that. And then you have the other people who can't be bothered, who kind of just want to disappear and not be here entirely. So there's a lot, you guys. There's a lot that goes into it. I also want to talk about Isis and Osiris. So, you know, I'll probably mention it in a longer way on a different video. But what I got, you know, it's so strange how the universe just works. One of my friends was telling me how she knew someone who had, you know, 2 dogs, for example. So these 2 dogs were male and female, sister and brother. And for some reason, they were adopted by the same person. So they actually ended up being inbreeding somehow. You know, these dogs are like 1 or 2 years old at this point. So the brother and sister dog that were adopted as puppies a few years ago, they now have children, like little puppies, all right? And they're basically inbred, right? Because it's like a brother and a sister who created these little dogs, and now you have like 6 or 7 or 8 puppies or whatever. And I was like, wow, that is such a wild story. First of all, for the owner to not take any precautions and, you know, kind of just stop that interaction or whatever. And then second of all, this is legit how they've been inbreeding us as well. You know, the story of Isis and Osiris came to mind when I actually kind of thought about it. I was like, well, Isis and Osiris and Seth, and then the other sister whose name I can't really remember right now, they were actually all siblings. You know, they were like brothers and sisters. So you had these 4 individuals that were basically Egyptian gods or whatever. And it kind of just reminded me how they've been inbreeding us, like especially in the most, in the longest lifetimes ago, like in the ancient Egypt and everything, where, you know, Egyptian pharaohs were marrying like their half sister. You know, Tutankhamun married his half sister and all of that. So this is their experiment on us. It's actually an accident that happened, just the way it happened with these dogs, that these dogs by accident, which it basically was an accident. You know, the owner, I don't know why they didn't like sterilize one of the dogs or kind of keep them away when one dog was in heat or whatever, but it just happened. And I can't really, you know, you can't really be mad with the dogs that came about, like the new fresh puppies and everything. And it's like, that is such a wild story though, right? So it was basically an accident by the universe or whatever, or by higher forces. And, you know, there's still a soul in the body, despite the poor genetics that are going to come about. So if you just think about all these stories, you know, was it Prince Charles of Spain or whatever that had the lisp? And that's why the Spaniards actually say gracias instead of gracias. And you know, in Mexico, they say it in a normal way. In Spain, they have that little lisp. That actually comes about, if people didn't know this, and I didn't know this up until recently too, but that came about because they actually had this inbred Spanish king who literally looked almost very inbred too. You know, if you look at his face and everything, I forgot his name, but I think it was Charles or something. And so they've been inbreeding in all of these royal families, the royal courts and everything for a very long time. But it basically started, you know, with Isis and Osiris, and then other stories before that too, you know, with the Greek gods and everything. The entire topic of inbreeding is so prevalent in all of these sagas, and even in the European culture and other cultures. It's basically just by accident that it happened, that they kind of inbred us. But, you know, despite the poor genetics, you know, like people actually looking inbred, I think with him, it was like the jawline, or I don't know, he really does look a bit off. There's still a soul in these bodies, just like there's a soul in these poor puppy bodies. You know, the puppies actually look really, really cute. I have to say that. It's not really their fault that the owners decided to inbreed them by accident or whatever, right? So that kind of just put a whole new twist on the entire inbreeding, and why you have inbreeding in a lot of these houses, or you used to have it, and also the story of Isis and Osiris in a way, but we might cover that in a different video too. So I hope that kind of made sense. Another thing I want to mention is the timelines are not really making sense necessarily. You know, there are important timelines like the Northern, Viking, Norwegian warrior timelines that really can't be forgotten. And I think a lot of this was around 800, 900, the year 1000, whatever. So with the erasing of 1,000 years of our history, like those things are important though, and they definitely happened. Even if they were rewritten, I don't necessarily think they were entirely erased, but I guess for some people, the time was erased somehow. And those people could actually be on a different timeline right now too, you know? So for them, 1,000 years was erased, whereas for other people like me and others, it was literally just rewritten somehow, if that makes sense. All right, I hope this wasn't too confusing. Let me know what your thoughts are. And thanks so much for your support and everything you do. Talk to you very soon. Until then, bye guys.